are listening to Real Estate Insiders Radio, featuring successful real estate insiders, influencers, and trendsetters sharing proven tips and strategies to help you navigate the complex world of real estate right now.
Welcome to the show today. This is Max Coursey, your host, and I am sitting here with Mr. Nathan Lustig, who is originally from Wisconsin, and he's been involved in technology startups for over 12 years, having started and sold 2 tech startups. He's currently a principal in Property Simple, a real estate technology company that gives real estate agents the power of artificial intelligence to help them sell more. He's also the co-founder of Andy's Property, a real estate investment firm and property management company based in Santiago, Chile, which has been a portfolio of rental properties and helps foreigners with all of their Latin American property needs. Welcome, Mr. Nathan Lustig.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks a lot for being here. So before we talk about real estate, this is a real estate show, but before I want to get a little background. So, you know, I've chatted with you before, so I know that you're a University of Wisconsin guy and started applying artificial intelligence at University of Wisconsin to create a business that kind of did something with textbooks and tickets. Can you kind of tell me a little bit about that and paint the picture, you know, how old you were, what time it was, what you were doing?
Yeah, so way back when I was a college sophomore, I didn't get football tickets. And, you know, being from Wisconsin, that's a big problem. Uh-huh. So, because student tickets sell out. And
wow.
So
how long does it take them to sell out?
In Wisconsin, you know, the Packers is a 20, 30-year waiting list. Oh, and gosh. For students at Wisconsin, it's, you know, 10, 15 minutes and it's gone. Wow. So if you didn't have the quick trigger finger, you were kind of screwed.
Uh-huh. And if you do have a quick trigger finger, can you make a buck?
You can. So when I didn't get tickets, I needed to find a way to do it. And so I ended up going out and figuring out how to buy some tickets. And then all my friends were wondering how I'd been able to do it. So I started helping them. And I realized that there was a need for a service that would match up people who had bought tickets and with people who wanted to buy them. And at the same time, I saw the same problem in textbooks. So if somebody would go out and buy a textbook new from the university bookstore for, say, $100 at the start of the semester, that same bookstore would offer them $25 at the end of the class, which I didn't think was fair at all. So
yeah, I mean, you're already paying them 5-6 figures.
Yeah, exactly.
So at least they can do is not rip us off on the textbooks, huh?
Exactly. So what we did was we set up, for both tickets and for textbooks, we set up sort of a marketplace, because textbooks are a commodity. It's the same textbook for every person. And same with student tickets. It's just a general admission ticket. So anybody that had a ticket or a textbook, they could say, I'm willing to sell for $10. I'm willing to sell for $20. I'm willing to sell for $50. And we would just make an order of those on a site. And anyone could come in and click a button and say, I want to buy this for $50 right now. And the transaction would happen and they'd go meet up. And so that was the first tech business that I did. Started, would have been 2005. And along with 2 other business partners, we spread it across the US. This was pre-Facebook, where they didn't have, you couldn't post classifieds, you couldn't post items to sell. It was just looking at people's pictures and connecting with friends. So we ended up spreading it across the country. We got over 150,000 users, a whole bunch of different universities, and ended up selling the business to a college-focused ad network. And nice. That was my first experience in tech.
Wow. So you had a successful entry and exit. So that was probably a valuable experience to learn that whole process.
Definitely. We all learned a huge amount going through, just from the very, very beginning, from how to run a business, how to test ideas, how to do accounting, all the way through to a successful sale.
So, all right, let's get into what everybody is here for, and we just made them wait for, is real estate. So now the next section of the story, you move down to Chile, like any good adventurer would do. go down? I don't know. Did you want to see the Andes, or did you want to go hang out in Santiago, or what were you, a wine connoisseur? Why Chile?
So with the digital asset business, I was in Madison still. I had just graduated, and I was thinking of moving to either San Francisco or Austin for the Wisconsin winter. I know you're in Idaho; it's cold, just like Wisconsin. Wanted to get out, and so when we were looking at San Francisco and Austin, we saw an article in Forbes that said that the Chilean government was giving $40,000 of free money, along with office space, a visa, a bank account, and connections to go down there for 6 months. And those 6 months just happened to be Chilean summer, Wisconsin winter. And so we applied and thinking, we've got nothing to lose. Let's see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And we were accepted. And in November 2010, my business partner and I went down there for 6 months, not really knowing what to expect. And so, after getting to Chile, the first thing that we had to do beyond figure out how to get around, and I didn't really speak any Spanish at the beginning, just a little bit, and is find a place to live. And so we started looking around, and there's no MLS in Chile. There's no MLS in most of Latin America. So finding a property is tough. So there's some websites that have properties that people upload to. We started looking around, and then we started contacting different either agents or owners directly to try to find a rental. But because there isn't an MLS where commissions are guaranteed, and there isn't a really good system of checking who your tenant is, local customs require that you have all sorts of paperwork that a foreigner isn't going to have. Mm-hmm. And a lot of landlords are sort of reticent to rent to a foreigner.
Yep.
They're not really sure if they're going to stay, if they're going to pay. They don't want to deal with someone who doesn't speak Spanish so well. And so what happened to me was I found a bunch of places online, and I would call them in my broken Spanish, and I'd show up, and it was either not what I had asked for. Like, I remember calling one, and the photos were of this beautiful 2-bedroom apartment overlooking the mountains. And what the reality was a 1.5 room closet with like a tiny little window. Man. And I showed up, and I just sort of looked at them, and I was like, really? You're going to fool someone with that photos to that? And they so that happened. And then there were other ones where I would call where the price wasn't listed online, and they'd give me, say, like $1,000 for a nice 2-bedroom. And then I'd have my Chilean friend call, and they'd offer him for like $600 or $500.
No, you didn't get the Chilean discount, huh?
No. So,
man, I would think you're a good-looking guy. I've seen your picture. I haven't met you in person, but I would think they'd like give you a nice little discount for that.
It was just hard, people. There weren't that many foreigners in Chile at the time. There's a lot more now, and so it just wasn't that common. And so if you didn't look like what a normal person would be like, which is having a contract for working in a business, having a Chilean equivalent of a credit report, showing that you pay taxes, all those sorts of things, and having a cosigner, even if you have money. So it was tough to find a property to rent. And we found the property to rent. We got it done. We got a great place, didn't get ripped off, and lived there for the 6 months. And so after the 6 months in the program, went back to the States, ended up selling that business. That's the one we sold to the Swiss. And then I went back to Chile in early 2012 with the idea of learning the rest of Spanish, and then also checking to see what kind of business opportunities there were. And the first thing that I saw when I came back was remembering finding how hard it was to find an apartment was, let's take U.S. standard business practices and rent out to foreigners. Because another big problem, and I didn't mention this when I left, is our landlord basically took our entire deposit, even though we left the thing in perfect condition. And that wasn't because he was being a bad person. It was just that the culture is generally people take 80, 90, 100% of your deposit. And you're building that in to the rental price if you're doing it. and you just
It's kind of like the deposit is more like, we're paying you this because I'm going to cause a little wear and tear.
yeah, or even just, it's like if you stay for a year, you're paying 13 months rent for 12 months. And so
Yeah.
you just have that amount of money in your mind and you understand that, and that's fine. But as a foreigner, you don't know that. So you end up
Mm-hmm.
paying more than you would have hoped to.
Yep.
And so we had all these problems of needing extra papers, um, certain landlords not wanting to rent to foreigners because it was just a hassle,
Mm-hmm.
other ones charging too much, problems with security deposits. And a friend of mine and I, who also went through Startup Chile, his name's VJ Kailis, the two of us ended up starting a little company to help rent properties out to foreigners to avoid all those problems.
That is awesome. It's so funny to listen to you talk about this because I had a similar experience in Australia. I told you I was there for a year, but nobody really wanted to rent to a 20-year-old American guy who was just completely full of testosterone in the city of Brisbane. It was kind of weird. And I mean, I don't blame them, but I understand what you're saying. And actually, I ended up kind of living in this sort of weird halfway house in Brisbane, Australia, because I couldn't get a lease. And so I signed a week-to-week lease, and I basically was kind of like a psychologist, in-house psychologist for a lot of very colorful people. But I don't miss the experience. It was a great experience for me.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. It's tough to find a place to live. I think it's one of those things that if you don't travel abroad very much, you sort of take it for granted that, hey, if I've got some money, I can find a nice place to live. But
Mm-hmm.
you know, in lots of Latin America, and it sounds like parts of Australia too, we had the money where we said, we can show you the money in the bank account. We got invited here on a government program. Here's an invitation letter.
Yeah.
We're trustworthy.
But people, you could see why they'd be skeptical because it's
Totally.
like, well, what if you just go back to America? You like burn my house down and go back to America, then what?
Yep.
I mean, and they already know what would happen if you were Chilean, whatever that is. But it's sort of an unpredictability factor. So it's like we were talking about making it business uncertainty. That kind of does that for landlords, I think, and I see why.
Yep.
It just seems riskier, and they probably want to charge you a little more money for that risk.
Yeah. So it's totally understandable. I mean, language barriers, cultural barriers, all sorts of stuff that make
Mm-hmm.
it so that a big portion of landlords just weren't interested in renting with foreigners.
So did you start to kind of rack up a portfolio of properties that you were renting to Americans, or did you start getting into different territories?
So what we did to start was that the real estate market at the time, and still is, it was a really interesting time to be buying. So we started buying ourselves and decided, yeah, we're just going to buy a couple of these apartments in the areas where foreigners want to be that have good returns and start renting them out. And so we bought two of them. And this was back in 2013. And so we bought two really nice one-bedroom apartments in modern buildings, say 5-year-old apartments that have rooftop pool, view of the Andes, just beautiful apartments. And we bought those two and started renting them out. And we put up a little website, andysproperty.com. But what we found was we had so much demand from foreigners looking for properties in English with, you're going to get your security deposit back if you don't wreck the place, that doesn't require all these Chilean pieces of identification and things that you're just not going to have. We had so many of those inbound requests that we decided we needed to build out an administration portfolio, because we didn't think it made sense to just refer them out to other people. We wanted to control the experience.
So an administration portfolio, is that key for property management?
Yeah. I translated it literally in my head from Spanish there, but yeah, so it's property management is what we're doing.
Okay, so then you have, say, an owner of Chilean properties, whether they're from Chile or whatever. Maybe they could hire you because you can say, "Hey, listen, I'll give you, instead of giving you 600 a month like the Chileans, I'm going to give you 700," and then you could maybe mark it up to 800 and still be selling it for cheaper than the rest of the market at 900.
Yeah, so what we do is we would go to, first we went to just our network and talked to our friends that either had, some were furnished apartments and some were unfurnished, but that they just didn't want to deal with renting to foreigners. And we said, look, if you rent through us, because we have this deal flow of foreigners coming, we can rent directly to foreigners, take care of it for you, and make sure that maybe you make an extra, instead of say like, 6% return on your property, maybe you're going to make 7 or 8 by working with us. And so that did two things. One is it built our inventory, and two, it allows us in Chile, the renter goes and pays between a quarter and 3/4 of a month's rent as a commission when they rent an apartment. So it allowed us to have a team.
Wait, a 0.25% of
a month's rent. So it's,
is that every month?
no, just one time. So it's a quarter of a month's rent to 3/4
okay.
of a month's rent.
Oh, okay. I got you.
Depending on the size of the property, how long the lease is, all that sort of stuff.
Okay. So averaging around,
Say a half a month's rent.
Okay. So if it's $1,000, $500.
Exactly. Yeah.
You're gonna get.
Yeah. And so we were doing two things. One is we were building up our team so that we could pay our team well and make a little bit of money. But then two, we were taking more and more properties into our portfolio that we're doing the property management on, where we would charge the landlord 8% per month of the rent. And so building up a portfolio that we were making monthly revenue on was our goal.
And that, I'd say that a lot of times that's pretty similar to what you would pay as a percentage of monthly rent for property management in the U.S. 8%. I mean, I've seen 6 to 10, but it seems kind of in there. Earlier, you said something about for the investor that you were pushing up the return, say from 6% to 7%, and so I'm assuming you're talking about in real estate. We talk a lot about the cap rate, which is basically you're going to take your net operating income, right? So collect how much income are you collecting minus your expenses to come up. That will give you the net operating income. Excuse me. So you take the total income minus expenses equals net operating income. You divide that by the purchase price, and magically a cap rate appears. So if you said 6 or 7%, let's say that I have $100,000 investment property in Chile. At the end of the year, I'm getting, $6,000, or I was getting $6,000. Now I'm getting $7,000 with you, right?
Yeah, and so that's a perfect example of one where if it's just an unfurnished apartment. So if it's an unfurnished apartment, they're probably making $6,000 and we can get them to 7. But if we can furnish it with them, then we can take them from that $6,000 to maybe 10 or 11 or even 12.
That is very interesting to me, and it reminds me of a dynamic that I've seen happening here in the United States, and I'm sure you have too, which is, the world of Airbnb, Vacasa, and VRBO, which is now you essentially have people competing with hotels, on a nightly or weekly basis at a higher cost per night or week. And then you see those property management fees go up significantly because more wear and tear, you've got disputes with credit cards, you maybe have a party, all kinds of little weird things that can come up. And not to mention you're getting the cleaner out there in between each one. And so it seems to me when you're talking about this distinction between the furnished and the unfurnished, it sounded like longer term leases. To me, I'm kind of seeing the same thing. Sometimes I actually see a higher return in some of these furnished markets here in the United States now. have you seen anything similar? I know you're living in LA right now,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
okay. So can you speak to that? How similarities or differences between Chile and LA in that regard?
So there's a couple of things. First, in Chile, we see it. There's three sort of niches. There's the unfurnished long term. There's the furnished long term, and then there's the Airbnb short term, where it's furnished as well. So in Chile, where it would be like say 6% for an unfurnished in the areas where we invest, it might be 10, 11, 12 in the areas that we invest in for just the furnished longer term. So that's 5 months to 12-month leases. And then if you're doing the short term, which is a couple days, couple weeks, you can really push it a lot higher. I mean, we have someone that we work with that gets 40, even 50%, because they have just super super high occupancy, like you said,
Wow.
competing with competing with the hotels.
Wow.
We also have another friend. So this is one we manage in a beach area that's outside of Santiago, where
North or south?
it's about an hour and a half to 2 hours northwest of Santiago.
And for those of the listeners who don't remember your South American geography, Chile is the one on the left side of the continent, and it's very long and skinny, and it hugs the coast all the way down the Pacific. And it's very mountainous with the Andes, and also a lot of geological activity, kind of like we have with the North American plate and the Pacific plate, that creates not the slipline faults necessarily, but volcanoes. A lot of volcanoes going down as through Mexico and the U.S. So I don't know where that was.
Well,
just
two other interesting Chile facts, just to give you an idea of how big it is. So if you took Chile and put it on its side and started the northern tip at New York and put it on its side going across the U.S., it would just about reach LA. So
Wow.
it's a huge country.
Yeah, and it's coastline all the way down too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the average width, and I'm going to get the stat exactly wrong, but I think the average width is only about 100 miles across the entire way. So imagine 100-mile corridor from New York to LA. That's Chile.
Wow. Yeah.
So there's those three interesting different dynamics of unfurnished long-term, furnished long-term, and then the Airbnbs. And so we're seeing a similar thing in the U.S. as well, in big cities, LA, New York, some of the other large cities. The interesting thing in the U.S. is that, especially in LA, there's a lot of a pushback from local communities that don't want Airbnb in the area.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in South America, we haven't really seen that yet. And returns are clearly better if you have a system to rent out in a tourist-friendly area. The returns are better, but like you said, there's a lot more headaches. You have to deal with cleaning. You have to deal with someone staying for a rowdy weekend with a bunch of guys on a bachelor party, or it's a different style and different risks, but also different rewards.
But when you talk about the returns are better, people who are kind of value investors in real estate, sort of like a Ben Graham would be for real estate, a lot of times they look at that. They're like, okay, well, this one pays 10 or 12%. I don't really care if I have to deal with all this stuff, because at 12%, if I have $1 million investment, I'm going to get 120 grand a year. At 6%, I'm only going to get 60. So at the end of the day, I can increase my income from 5 grand a month to 10 grand a month just by being in something that pays a 10% return.
Yep. Exactly.
And you know what? I like the idea of having a vacation rental down there on the beach. I mean, can you go visit it? And I don't know if that you probably can't go write that off, or can you? How does that all work, being an American owning property down there?
I don't know. I think you might be able to, depending on how you set it up. But yeah, one of the ones we manage is a really nice 3-bedroom, about I'm trying to go from square meters to square feet here, but like about a 1,200 square foot, more or less, oceanfront condo, and that will rent out on, if you're doing it Airbnb, it'll rent out for between $200 and $250 a night. So to make a nice amount of money on it, you can do well just even renting it out a couple months a year and then using it yourself or going down to visit.
What is your vacancy rate on there at $200 to $250 a night?
So this one that we do is somebody who likes to use it and then also doesn't want just sort of anyone in there. So
wait a minute. He likes to use his oceanfront condo.
Shocking, right?
I'm just playing. I want to be this guy. I don't have oceanfront condo.
So he will generally have all of January, February, and March rented out, almost full, because that's the high season, and then just sort of sporadically. So it'll be, to say a quarter of the year to a third of the year fully booked up. And then the rest he'll either use it or rent it to family and friends for cheap.
Nice. Yeah, I think this is such an interesting opportunity right now. After when the recession hit, it decimated so many real estate markets, in the US and internationally, but a lot of the ones that were hit last were these vacation properties, and a lot of them haven't fully recovered. But I think it's interesting because, a lot of them have really high returns if you convert it to a vacation rental. So, if you have in an area like San Diego where people like to come in the summer, or a place like Sun Valley, Idaho, where people like to come in the winter, or, LA, I'm sure everyone's all year round probably, but, it's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, there's, it's interesting to be able to see what a different real estate market looks like. Because in the U.S., we like to think about how, it's fairly similar, the rules to the game. Each city is different, but the overall rules are more or less the same about finding values and finding things that are good priced. Whereas, in Latin America, there's lots of interesting different sort of tricks to being able to do that.
But when you got into Chile, and I know that you had this property management company, and got into investment in Chilean real estate, and it's fascinating. I could talk to you about it for hours, but I know that you also kind of got a little bit into using artificial intelligence. My understanding is kind of basically utilizing Watson or Google. I don't know if you're using analytics or Amazon. I don't even know what Amazon's AI thing is called, but basically using some of those services to get analytics in a real estate brokerage setting. And it sounded like you found something kind of interesting down there in Chile, and you brought it back to the US, which is how a lot of great ideas come, is from going and seeing other cultures and seeing, wow, people do this differently. And sometimes it is a seed that makes you think of something, where we're not taking advantage of it here. So what did you, tell me, what is artificial intelligence for the normal, real estate brokers out there like me? And so what is artificial intelligence, and how are you utilizing it to improve the experience for a real estate broker?
Sure. So I'll start, just give you a little story of how we got from Chile to here, and then I'll go into the AI piece. And so I was in Chile with I was doing the real estate. I had made friends with another guy from the US. His name's Adrian Fisher, and he had been down in Latin America for, I think at that point, about 4 or 5 years, and he had built an apartment rental payment system for Argentina and Chile. And so it allowed people to pay their rent online, pay their rent at an ATM machine, at the grocery store, and then connect those payments online. And so we became friends and started talking about different property stuff. And so with the payment system, he realized that he had all these connections to real estate agents, and also realized that since there is no MLS, that creating a sort of Zillow of Chile would be really hard, but decided to do it. So built a thing called Propiedad Fácil, which is like easy property in Spanish.
Easy property, yeah.
And became one of the biggest property portals in Chile. And so,
and for dorks like me, I love, one of my hobbies, even though I'm a real estate broker, is looking at real estate in different parts of the world. So, whether it's Australia or, Europe or wherever, I like to look at different places, warm places, all of them. And you notice that the countries like Australia that have basically a national MLS, or the US, it's very easy to search a lot of properties. And I've found this looking specifically in Central and South America before, that I can only find one guy's website with his 4 properties, and I can't look at every single property there. People haven't aggregated that data yet. So more power to him. I hope it works, because I want to be searching, more real estate down there.
Yeah. So in that, and cold starting a property portal with no MLS to have all the properties on there and generate organic traffic, we were saying, well, how do you do that? And so what we came up with was sending massive amounts of traffic to a small amount of properties. Because if you have a couple of agents that start your MLS and start putting up properties onto your portal, you need to make them happy. So instead of running ads for Propiedad Fácil, what we did was we started running just social media ads for one property. And so we found that we could generate hundreds and hundreds of leads for a few properties. And the clients loved it. And so we kept building more tech, building lead capture, and starting to do a really good job in Latin America. And so fast forward to around August of 2015, we started looking at the United States and said, well, we have this great tech in Chile, and we figured out this sort of unique way to send traffic to a couple of different properties. Is there something like that in the States? And so we called up a real estate agent friend of ours and said, we've got 300 leads on this property this week. What do we do? How do we work all those? And and that was the reaction. Just laughed at us and said, there's no way you have that. I don't believe you, because that just doesn't happen. And we said, well, here, we'll show you. And he's like, well, how fast can you get back to the States? I want this. And so what we did was, in late 2015, we came back to the States, took our tech from Latin America, which at that time was a lot of really social media based lead gen, and incorporated it into the US model. So we connected in the MLS, we put it in English and adapted it for the US market. And what we found was that the same model worked. So we were able to generate lots of leads on social media. But the problem that we found was that many agents either didn't understand social media, didn't understand how internet leads work, in that you need to have a lot more internet leads to have a close. They didn't want to work them. They didn't work them at all. And it just wasn't working. So what we found was that because of our tech background, Adrian's been doing tech for probably like 15 years. I've been doing it 12 years. We said, well, how can we do this to make it really, really simple for an agent? And what we
That's
found
the key with everything. You have to really make things simple for agents, because a lot of times agents, in my experience anyways, have certain personality traits that make them very well suited for being an agent. But some people are not very, they're not very good with their iPhone or their programs or their software or whatever. And so, you see these software programs out there that are extremely complicated, and yeah, they have tons and tons of capabilities, but you need to really distill it to its essence in order for the vast majority of agents to actually implement it.
Yeah, and even when either us or other people were putting leads on a platter, some just wouldn't. They were very stuck in their ways, which makes sense because they're making money. They didn't want to make changes, and so one stat that we've seen is that Zillow has concierge leads where they're out there working the leads for you, and then they call you and say, "Hey, this person's ready to go." And only 50% of the time do the agents actually pick up the phone when Zillow calls and says, "Hey, we've got this concierge lead." Whether that lead is any good or not, they're only picking up half the time because they're busy. They're out talking to people. And so what we said is, how can we do this so that the agents will get the power of really good tech and not have to change how they operate very much? And the answer that we came up with is artificial intelligence. And so artificial intelligence, going back to your question, what is it? A lot of people think of it as, the crazy guy from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or HAL from 2001 or some supercomputer that's going to take over the world. It's really not that. What it actually is companies like Facebook, Google, Amazon, IBM, Microsoft that have these systems that are good at learning and are good at recognizing things.
Kind of like predictive analytics.
Yeah, so it's things like, in Google, a really simple one is if you use a priority inbox and it tells you what's important and what's social and what's sales. That's an algorithm being trained by reading those emails and saying, this looks like sales, I'm going to put it in sales. This looks like promotions, I'm going to put it in promotion.
I love that. I've always loved my Gmail inbox because I just don't have as much spam. And just like you said, it kind of keeps it nice and tidy. So it's, all the ads are in one spot, like whoever's trying to drip market you, and then your important emails hopefully are in another. But it's a fascinating time because it seems like just 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the technology wasn't nearly as good as it is today at kind of sorting it, sifting it, and putting it into buckets for humans to digest.
Exactly. And so what we see is that it was actually, so 5 years ago is about when it started to become more prevalent, but 6 months ago was when it became more widely available, when a lot of these companies allowed other software companies to start using their artificial intelligence to do stuff. So what that means is that if you have good technology and understand how AI works, you can plug into Facebook's AI, you can plug into Google's AI, Amazon's AI, and start to teach your system to do things. And so what we're doing is we created a system where our AI, which is a combination of all of these companies' AIs and our own that we have in-house, will go out and find the best properties in your area that look good. So what photos from the MLS are really great photos that people are going to click on? What properties are well priced in the area that look interesting for someone to click on? What are the characteristics of a good property that people click on and want to buy? And it will choose properties for you in your area and create these lead capture pages for you and automate all of your online marketing. So it's going to go out instead of you having to create a Facebook ad, a Twitter ad, an Instagram ad, LinkedIn, set up retargeting, create all this ad creative. Our system will do that automatically across all those platforms for you 24/7. And then it'll do the targeting. So it'll do two things. It can either, you give us a whole bunch of buyers and sellers that you gave us or that did a deal with you previously, and we can find.
So you're saying like an email address or a phone number, maybe past clients, or
if you give us past client information, we can find the patterns that those people exhibit. So are they between certain ages? Did they come from a certain area? Do they have certain income qualifications?
Or maybe a certain person really likes mountain biking and, being in nature or whatever. Another person really likes parties, and maybe that person wants to live in a condo in downtown, whereas the other person maybe wants to live by the beach or up in the mountains or, by some type of natural feature. So can you actually take these and kind of put them to buckets and create some type of a content or advertisement that may resonate with people at a higher level than just randomly throwing out there the single ad?
Exactly. So what we do is we take these lead capture pages that are coming from the MLS that our AI has looked at and said, these are well priced, these are great photos. And then we target automatically the people that look like they should be buyers and sellers. So if you tell us, hey, the people that generally buy my properties are between this age and this age, have a credit score above 650, and generally make more than, we'll call it $50,000 a year. Our AI will go out, create all that ad creative, and go find those people that match that criteria, and get them to become leads. So that's the first thing, and that's great. But if you're not getting those leads worked, if you're not working them, they're not worth anything.
Yeah, so, and people, I think you touched on something where agents have a bad rep of not following up with people quickly or consistently, and I think that's true in a lot of cases. But sometimes the consumer has a high expectation now. Sometimes they'll call one person, no one answers. They call the next until somebody answers. Instead of waiting for 5 or 10 minutes for someone to get off the phone or whatever is going on. Maybe someone's in a closing or something. So sometimes agents can't get back right away. It's like an hour or two or longer sometimes. But so do you have something that automates the process so it at least says, hey, Nate, thanks for reaching out. My name's Max Coursey. I'd love to, help you sell a house or buy a house or whatever, and kind of automates it so that you at least have an initial communication quickly?
So it's exactly that, but one step farther. Because the fact that we have an AI that's looking at what property did they look at, what was their behavior on our site, on the lead capture pages before they did a contact with you. What do they look like on Facebook?
Now, when you say what is their behavior, are you talking cookies? Okay, this guy clicked on how to, finance a home and this and finance this, and then you look at it and you go, oh, this guy needs to talk to a lender. This guy needs to talk to a lender, or is it something different than that?
So it's some of that, but there's a lot more to it. Where, for example, if somebody is clicking on school information, that means that it's likely that they have a kid, and
that's a hot button. I mean, I've got kids, and I literally will not buy a house outside of their district because I want to give them kind of that stability, and also I personally like the idea of selecting a district to put your kid in, for whatever parameters it is for you, but at least being aware of it and.
And so what our system will do, instead of how you described it, where it's sort of a generic email that might be written by an agent, might be written by, is a computer generated thing, ours will have really specific data about what they've been looking at. So it might mention the school district that they're looking in. It might mention the exact address, but without, putting the zip code and the MLS number like a computer generated one would. It might have pieces of data that make it look like it's from a real person. And it will send, depending on the agent. So most of the time what we see is it should send a little bit of time after they look at it, but not instantly. Because if it's instant, then it's probably not a human. But if you wait a little bit of time, then it is. Obviously, you don't want to wait for hours and hours.
But wait 4 minutes or something.
Yeah, wait a little bit of time.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, because sometimes you do one of those things and 1 second later, hi, Nate, thank you so much for, it's like,
exactly.
You didn't write that. That's automated. Exactly. But this is well, did he write it?
Exactly.
Because it came 7 minutes later.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, thank you very much. And until next time, maybe we'll get you back here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I'd be happy to talk again. I got all sorts of stories you can get into. Talk for hours about Latin American real estate or AI.
Cool. And we'll get some links up on the website for you. We as in whoever's behind the scenes on this.
Awesome.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Nate, and I will we'll talk to you later.
All right,
Bye.
thanks. Bye.
Okay, bye.
This has been another episode of Real Estate Insiders Radio. To hear all episodes featuring our handpicked real estate insiders, visit us online at realestateinsidersradio.com.